2008 Chevy Equinox, engine power is reduced, P0454, evap system pressure sensor, switch intermittent, and P0641, sensor reference, Volt A circuit open.
You raggedy bitch.
So if you're familiar with the channel, you know that this is my mom's Chevy Equinox. It came in about 6 months ago, needed head gaskets. So we put that on it. Here we are quite some time later, and it's back with a new problem. In the intro, I rattled off a code, P0454. I'm going to take that with a grain of salt, because what I'm really interested in is that P0641, the 5-volt circuit reference. It means that we've got an electrical issue. You see, this code's been coming and going and coming and going. The engine, it'll be all right, and then when it sits still and idle and gets, really good and heat soaked, it'll throw that low power mode. It's thrown a couple of different codes along with that 5-volt circuit. We've got codes from the map sensor before, we've got codes for the EGR sensor before. All that stuff ties into what is called the 5-volt reference circuit. So we don't know where our issue is actually at. This is one of those cases of you could throw sensors at it, but that's probably not going to fix your problem. We're going to have to actually diagnose this thing. This is one of my least favorite tools because I don't know how to use it. Okay, so prior to working on this car, I've been driving it, seeing what it does, seeing how it acts, checking the codes when they do come up. One of the things is that it'll throw that low power mode, and then you let it set for a few minutes. You turn it back on, the low power mode's gone, but the check engine light's still on. One time I had the check engine light actually just shut off while driving down the road. And then it came back with the evap code that I'm seeing now. Before it was showing me a map code, I believe. So, 5-volt circuit reference, 5-volt reference circuit is one wire that receives 5 volts from the ECU so that it can help measure what the sensors are reading. You've got to start somewhere to get a good idea. I'm not going to go too far in depth on that. Just know that it sends 5 volts from the computer to these sensors, and then that allows it to feed information back to the computer based on the voltage that, yeah. So I've got my thing here set to DC volts 20. I've got it clamped to a good bare ground on the body. I've already got the EGR harness off. See, what I've figured out is that this 5-volt reference on this engine, at least circuit 8, they are gray wires. So I know that I can at least start where to start probing. I've got these handy dandy slip-on units that go on to my little voltmeter here. These are pokey. You can get in there and really, get a good measure without having to destroy your sensor. I'm going to turn the ignition to the on position, engine off, ignition on. So now that I've got that, I hit my... There's 5 wires in this EGR harness. I know that the second one from the left is the 5-volt reference because when I stick my probe in there, I get 5.05 volts on my meter. So I know that I've got power there. It's 5 volts. And what I'll do is I'll go around to every harness that I can get to that is supposed to be on this circuit, and I will find the gray wire and probe it. The map sensor's got 5 volts there. What else? Oh, my dad thinks that cats have done something to the harness because apparently cats climb up in the engine bay here. The oil pressure sensor down here where they like to climb up has got 5-volt reference as well. I've got 5 volts there. See what happens if I probe that and move it. Still got 5 volts. The electronic throttle body has got a 5-volt reference on it. There's 6 plugs on this. I know the middle one and the bottom. I've got 5 volts there. The evap or purge sensor up here, solenoid, whatever that is, that does not have a 5-volt reference going to it. Let's see, the coolant temperature sensor I think has one. It took a while to find, but I was able to find a rough diagram on the old internet that would show me some of this circuitry. AC refrigerant pressure switch has got 5-volt reference on it. Of course, that's down here too, where the cats were climbing in and out of the car. All right, so I'm not getting anywhere with that, and everything in me just wants to pull the whole damn harness out and start checking continuity across every wire on it. Well, that's a lot, isn't it? That might not actually be the problem. So, time out. Let's stop and think. When I was driving this car and I was watching the live data on my scanner, I was getting a EGR error reading of 99.2, which means that there could possibly be a problem with this EGR valve. So, I don't know what I'm doing, but I'm going to try to actuate this EGR valve to make sure it's not stuck or frozen and give my, where do we go next after that? So, I've got an alligator clamp to the engine for a good ground. I've identified the ground wire for the EGR valve, and I've carefully placed my alligator clip on that last plug to the right, the 5th one, and I've got to make sure that I don't allow that to touch any of the other wires when I go to activate the 12-volt with this right off of the battery. Get out of there. All right, that is live. Also got to make sure I don't ground it out on itself, right? There are a number of things I'm doing wrong here. That should not be live. Well, what's the 12-volt for the doggone EGR valve? So from what I've been able to gather, the pin on the very far left is the, better not plug that in yet. The pin on the very far left, opposite of the ground, is the EGR high. So I'm hoping that if I can just reach in here and touch that this thing will click open. It clicked! It always scares me when I do stupid stuff like this. Alright, so that's doing stuff. I still don't know if it's doing the right stuff, but I know it's at least not frozen or seized. And we killed the battery. Great. Ah! Alright, so before the battery took a nap, I crawled under here, did take a look at the evap canister and check its harness as well. Everything kind of looks good. The only reason I did this is because we do have an evap code. So what I think I'm going to do is I'm going to get this thing just enough juice, hopefully, to fire it up. I'm going to clear out the codes, let it start from square one, run it, and see and wait for the condition to occur again, and then take a look at what's going on with some things. Alright, it showed 7 codes when this thing came up. Let's see what we got now. Of course, it's going to be a hot mess after everything I was just doing to it. Map sensor, throttle position sensor, oh yeah, everything that I unplugged. Let's just clear all that out. Hard to tell, that's not a check engine light, that's not a check engine light, that's other problems. But the check engine light is off, so I'm just gonna sit here, let it run, and then monitor these systems. Coolant temperature 127, closed loop fuel system. Map is running around 5, which is normal. Here's the one that concerned me earlier. EGR PTC 0, 99.2 on the error. EVAP PTC 14 and dancing. Okay, so I've had this thing running for about 40 minutes now. It's gotten hot enough that the coolant fan has come on 2 or 3, 4, 5 times, which for this engine there it goes, is about 213 degrees. But the intake air temperature has still been sitting at the 90 degree range. It just now got up to about 98. So now I'm going to close the hood, which I have already, and let it really heat soak and get the IATs up. Because when you've got high engine temperature and low intake air temperature, it affects the way that the engine, you know, does the fuel stuff and the spark and timing stuff. So we're going to let it heat soak, because what I said before, when this thing heat soaks real bad is when it'll throw that mode. So we'll let it run, let that intake air temperature sensor get real hot, and we'll see what happens to it. In the meantime, I'll also monitor some more of the live data while it's doing it. Alright, so Google, I've been wearing it out. There's a pretty good website called motor.com that explains and breaks down what each one of those live data points means. You can get a cheap little code reader from Walmart for less than 50 bucks, and it'll have a selection on there that shows you live data on all of the sensors in the car, if it's OBD2, of course. That has helped me to understand a lot of what's going on with the engine and what it should and shouldn't be doing. Let the thing sit here for 10 minutes with the hood closed and the engine running. IATs got up to about 130 degrees, and then boom, we got the check engine light reduced power mode. But this time, the only thing that's showing on the check engine light is the 5-volt reference circuit. So what it's looking like is that those other codes that we're getting for evap or map are probably coming from the engine being driven during the low power mode, which, you know, when it goes into that mode, it doesn't want to let the engine accelerate like it normally would. You can give it a lot of throttle, but it still slowly accelerates. That's probably throwing some things off, making the ECU say, oh, whoa, even though it's doing it to itself. So one thing I noticed is that the entire time it was running, not once did the computer try to command the EGR valve to open. Now, we talked about what was showing with that 99.2 reading on the error. What that usually means is that the EGR valve is being commanded close, which would be the EGR PTC, or the commanded, you know, amount to be open. 0, it's being shown 0, but the error is because it's showing that it is slightly open in some way. Now, is the valve open or closed? I don't know, but something inside the valve is telling the computer that it is, even though the computer wants it closed. So that could be one reason why it's not wanting to command it to open, because it already senses that there's an error with it, but for whatever reason it's not throwing an EGR code. Secondly, we don't see it until the intake air temperatures go up. So one thing about intake air temperature is that it has an effect on the way that certain things in the car are commanded by the PCM, ECU, ECM, that thing, one of those things, right? So the IATs, once they get up to about 130 degrees, it will actually try to command the EGR closed. Well, in our case, we already know that the computer thinks that it's commanding it closed, but it's showing that it's getting an error saying that it's open. So now I'm at the point of let's throw parts at it. Yep, I'm gonna try, let's just try swapping out the EGR valve. I don't know. I'm out here in the junkyard where there's 100 of these things, and for good reason. But my purpose here is to try to find an EGR valve, because people tend to get an EGR code, throw a new valve on there, that not fix their problem, then the car ends up at the junkyard later with a good old valve on it. It's also about 1/10 of the price of the parts store. So let me see if I can find one, and then we'll go out here, throw it on the car, nothing will change, and we'll go back to that. Well, I would have no such luck finding a replacement, though I did, however, find one that was an original unit, and when I took it off, it was so clean inside and out. I mean, like, it looked really good. So this thing must have been one of the few that actually ran clean, or had been recently serviced, who knows. I also snatched up the mass airflow sensor off that car, because why not? We'll see if this does anything. Alright, I don't want to start counting chickens, but we might have this thing whipped. Went over to my buddy Steve's house after I left the junkyard, threw on the new EGR valve and the new mass airflow sensor. EGR valve made no difference, and of course that's because I was not correct in what I was seeing in the information about what that 99.2 was. More than likely, with my code scanner, it's 99.2% closed. So EGR made no difference, but I know I've got a good valve on there. However, the mass airflow sensor on this car also contains the intake air temperature sensor. If you recall, every time the IATs got up to about 130, it would go into low power mode. So we may have had a bad air intake temperature sensor. I let it sit over at Steve's house. The IAT's heat soaked up to about 140 degrees. Drove it home about 12 miles. Now it's sitting here. I'm letting it heat soak again. So far so good. No lights, no error messages. 122 degree IAT. We're getting close to that magic number of 130 that would make it trigger in the past. Gonna let it keep running and we'll see where it's at in a moment. All right, so about 15 minutes later, intake air temperature is about 141 degrees. Got no check engine light, no error messages. I'm not gonna call it fixed yet. I'm gonna drive this thing for the next week, daily drive it to and from work, do my normal errands, put it through its paces. We'll check back in and see how she's doing in about 5 days. Side quest. This is the door harness out of the driver's side door on Mom's car. And if you've ever owned anything from GM in the mid-2000s, you know that the electrical systems in these cars suck, and the wiring is to match. You see here, many of these are broken. Those are not cut. Those are broken because this part sits inside the door jamb. Bendy, 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 snap. And you can also see where in the past I've rigged it up just enough so that her window would work. So what I think I'm going to do while I've got the car is go through and remove a section of each of these wires and solder in some fresh wire to hopefully, you know, get it better going down the road. Now, the right thing to do would be to have one of those multi-roll, multi-pack, multi-color deals to get all the wiring right, but since this car's next home is probably going to be a junkyard one day, we're going to go with the universal wire color, red. Do them all the same, heat shrink them up, throw it back in the car. Well, hopefully that's better than it was. All right. Well, I've been torture testing Mom's car for about a week, and I have not had any issues out of it. Running about as good as I could expect it to, given what it is, and we fixed that little issue with the wire harness in the door. So this thing's all ready to go, and I'm gonna give it back to her tomorrow and get my Ultima back, which is now popping fuses for the blower motor. Sometimes the problem is right there in front of your face, but then other times, you gotta do things the hard way. See you next time.